It started with a joke. Or maybe not. Maybe I just told myself it was a joke. Because the alternative, that my best friend was actually testing me, was too much to process at the time. It was a Saturday. Early fall. The kind of afternoon that still felt like summer if you stood in the sun but reminded you it was October the second you stepped into the shade. Mason had come over after his morning gym session, his hoodie still damp from sweat, basketball shorts hanging low on his hips. "You got anything clean?" he asked, already halfway through my closet before I could answer. "I'm not your personal stylist," I muttered from the couch, not bothering to look up from my laptop. He laughed. "No, but you are the one who insists I dress like a retired PE teacher. You do." He made a noise of mock offense and tossed his hoodie at me, the damp sleeve landing across my face. I grimaced. "Seriously, Mason? Gross." "Then help me out. Give me something that screams. Effortlessly hot," he said, doing air quotes with both hands. "You know, like you." The way he said it was casual, but it hit a little too hard. Mason had always flirted like that. Reckless, teasing. But it never felt personal. Not until recently. Not since the night he got too drunk and asked if I thought he was attractive. Not since I caught him staring at me from across the kitchen, shirtless, the look in his eyes unreadable. I tried to ignore the twist in my stomach and nodded toward my dresser. "Top drawer, there's a black tee in there. Slim fit. Might be your size." He pulled it out and gave it an appraising glance before stripping off his own tank top right there in my room. I looked up, just for a second, and immediately regretted it. Mason was lean, all muscle and golden skin, the kind of guy who made it look like he barely tried. I'd seen him shirtless 100 times. Beach trips, gym selfies, changing after practice back in high school. But this felt different. More intimate, more deliberate. He tugged the shirt on, smoothing it over his chest, then turned to the mirror. "You think this works on me?" I shrugged. "Yeah, looks good." "Like hot good?" he asked, turning around, studying the fit. My mouth went dry. I pretended to focus on my laptop again. "It's just a shirt, dude." He didn't reply right away. Instead, he stepped closer, too close, and dropped onto the arm of the couch beside me. "I'm serious," he said, his tone suddenly softer. "If I started dressing more like you, do you think people would look at me differently?" I turned to face him. His expression was open, almost vulnerable, which threw me off. Mason wasn't the kind of guy to ask for validation. Not like this. "People already look at you," I said quietly. "You know that." "Yeah, but..." He looked down at his hands. "I don't know, I feel like when you walk into a room, people really look. Like you've got your shit together, like you know who you are." Something in my chest twisted. "I don't," I said honestly. "Not really." He looked up at me, his eyes catching mine. "Well, you fake it better than anyone I know." We sat there for a second too long, the air between us thick with something unspoken, and then he stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "All right, give me something else. Let's make it a full outfit. Like, if I were you for a day." I blinked. "You want to play dress up now? Come on," he grinned. "Let me wear your life for 5 minutes." He was halfway into my closet before I could protest again, pulling out a pair of my jeans, then my boots, then one of my button-ups. He changed, piece by piece, slowly, like he was performing for an audience of one. And maybe he was. When he was done, he stood in front of my mirror, studying himself like he wasn't sure who he was anymore. I stood behind him, hands in my pockets. "You look..." "Different?" "Yeah," I said, "but good." He turned around, suddenly serious. "So if I showed up like this, looking like you, talking like you, would you still think of me the same?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" His jaw worked. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For a second, I thought he was going to walk away. But he didn't. He stepped closer instead. So close I could feel the warmth radiating off his skin through my clothes. The shirt he was wearing. My shirt. "Mason, I'm not playing," he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought I was, but I'm not." And just like that, everything changed. I didn't know what to say. He was standing so close I could see the pulse ticking in his neck. My shirt clung to him in places it didn't on me, stretched slightly across his chest, tighter at the arms. I could still smell my detergent on him, but it was mixed now with his scent too, warm and familiar. It messed with my head. "You're not playing?" I repeated, half dumb. Mason shook his head slowly. "I thought I was just messing around. I don't know, that I just liked how your stuff made me feel. But then I saw your face when I was wearing it." He stepped even closer, and then I realized it wasn't just the clothes. My heart was pounding. Too fast, too loud. "Mason," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you've never said anything like this before." "Because I didn't know," he said. "Not really. I mean, I noticed stuff. How different I felt when I was around you. How it messed with my head when people asked if we were together and it didn't bother me." That made me pause. "People asked that?" "All the time," he admitted. And I always laughed it off. But it stuck with me. And lately, I've been wondering. His voice got quieter. "Wondering if you ever looked at me the way I've been looking at you." He was close enough now that I could feel the heat coming off his body. His hands hovered like he didn't know where to put them. I swallowed. "I've looked." That admission hung between us, heavy and irreversible. Mason's eyes searched mine, his face unreadable for a beat. Then, like something in him cracked open, he leaned in. Not fast or urgent, just enough that his forehead nearly touched mine. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered. "But I want to find out. With you." It wasn't a grand confession, it wasn't a movie moment. It was nervous and hesitant and real. I nodded slowly, the tension in my chest loosening just enough to let something else in. "Then start with this," I said, and lifted one hand to his chest, just resting it there, testing the water. He didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped into the touch, letting his forehead drop lightly against mine. And that's how we stayed. Not kissing, not rushing, just breathing the same air, feeling something shift in the space between us. Eventually, he pulled back and gave a sheepish smile. "So do I get to keep this outfit, or what?" "Hell no," I said, finally letting out a laugh. "You stretch out my jeans and we're done." Mason smirked. "You're just mad I look better in them." I rolled my eyes, but I didn't move my hand from his chest. The tension wasn't gone. It had just transformed into something softer, something heavier. He dropped back down onto the couch beside me, this time with no space between us. Our shoulders touched, then our thighs. Then, without asking, he rested his head on my shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it was. We didn't say much after that. The movie was still playing in the background, but neither of us was watching. He traced a line along my knee with his thumb, almost absent-mindedly. I let him. I didn't ask him what any of this meant. I didn't need to. Not yet. But I knew it was the start of something. Something we couldn't joke our way out of. And neither of us was pretending anymore. That night stuck with me. Not because anything big happened. There was no dramatic kiss, no confessions under moonlight, no one tearing their clothes off. It was quieter than that, subtler, but somehow it felt more intense than anything else I'd experienced in years. I woke up the next morning to the smell of coffee. For a second, I forgot everything. Just the normal rhythm of my weekend routine. Then I remembered Mason, his head on my shoulder, the heat of his body pressed against mine on the couch, the way he looked at me like I was something more than just his best friend. I sat up and blinked against the light filtering through the window. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft clinking of a spoon against a mug in the kitchen. I patted over, still half asleep. Mason was shirtless again. My shirt from yesterday draped over the back of a chair, his gym shorts hanging low like always. He was stirring sugar into 2 mugs like it was just another morning, like we hadn't crossed a line that neither of us had acknowledged for years. "Hey," he said without turning around. "Morning," I mumbled. He passed me a mug and we both stood there for a minute, sipping quietly. "Sleep okay?" he asked, finally glancing over. I nodded. You? He shrugged. Eventually. The silence that followed wasn't awkward exactly, but it wasn't comfortable either. It was filled with everything we weren't saying, everything we'd said without words the night before. I leaned back against the counter, studying his face. So, about last night, he exhaled. Yeah, was that real? Mason set his mug down, slowly. I don't know how to answer that. Try. He scratched the back of his neck, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. I didn't plan any of that. I didn't come over thinking, like, today's the day I flirt with my best friend in his own clothes. I snorted. Could have fooled me. He smirked, then grew serious again. But it didn't feel fake. I meant what I said. I've been confused, I guess, about stuff, about how I feel around you. You're allowed to be confused. I know, he said, but I don't want to screw this up. You didn't. We stood there again in that charged stillness, the kind that made everything feel like it was balanced on a wire, one move away from tumbling into something else entirely. You know, I said slowly, you're the one who said you wanted to try on my life for a day. He raised an eyebrow. I was half joking. And yet you're still standing here in my boxers and drinking from my mug like you pay rent. He looked down, then back up, smiling. I guess I just felt weirdly comfortable, like more me than I've felt in a while. That admission landed somewhere deep in my chest. Because I got it. I'd spent years learning how to feel comfortable in my own skin, and Mason, despite his confidence and charm, had always seemed like he was chasing something. Maybe that something was clarity, or maybe it was me. Later that day, we sat out on the balcony. The sun was warm, and Mason had finally changed into his own clothes, though I noticed he still wore my hoodie, unzipped, casual, like a silent statement he didn't feel the need to explain. Can I ask you something? He said after a long stretch of silence. Sure. If I kissed you right now, would you stop me? I didn't look at him right away. I watched the light catching in the glass of the building across the street, the way the wind moved through the trees below. Then I turned and looked at him. No, I said. I wouldn't stop you. Mason nodded once. Then again. Then he didn't do anything. He just sat with that knowledge, like he didn't need to test it right away. Like just knowing was enough. For now. I don't know why that made my chest feel like it was about to cave in. Later, as he was leaving, he stood at the door for a second too long. I'll come by tomorrow? He asked. Yeah, I said, voice quiet. I'd like that. And just before he stepped out, he leaned in. Not for a kiss. Just to press his forehead lightly against mine again, like he had the night before. Night, he whispered. And then he was gone. The next day, I woke up with Mason's hoodie still draped across the back of my chair, the faint scent of him lingering in the fabric. It was absurd how much it made my chest tighten, how even the idea of him being nearby could set my pulse racing. I shook my head, telling myself to relax. It was just a hoodie, a piece of clothing. Not a declaration of anything. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling. I was still in that fog when my phone buzzed. A text from Mason. Hey, I was thinking maybe I could come by later. Bring over that shirt you said looks best on me? My chest jumped. That casual wording, the way he made it seem like nothing while threading 1,000 unspoken words beneath, made my fingers freeze over the keyboard. Sure, I typed back, trying to sound normal, though the weight in my stomach told a different story. He arrived in the late afternoon, a little wind tousling his hair. The familiar grin was there, but it carried a hint of something else, something softer, more cautious, almost tender. He carried a small pile of my clothes in his hands, a couple of fitted tees, one hoodie, and those black jeans from yesterday. Thought we could make a little fashion experiment, he said, with a teasing edge that barely hid the nervousness in his eyes. I gestured toward my bedroom. Suit yourself, but don't wreck anything, all right? Never, he promised, though the way he walked into the room, confident, casual, yet with that subtle intensity, made my heart lurch. I sat on the edge of my bed, pretending to scroll through my phone, though I couldn't focus on a single word. He stripped his shirt off again, like it was second nature, and I couldn't help but notice the way his muscles flexed, the faint curve of his collarbones, the subtle dip of his abs. He was a friend, my best friend, and yet here he was, wearing my clothes, standing in my room, looking more intimate than I'd ever let myself imagine. He picked up a dark gray tee, examining it like a precious object. He murmured. "Think this one works on me? You look good in anything," I muttered, immediately cursing the way my own voice betrayed me. He turned, eyebrow cocked, smirking. "You always say that. Are you trying to flatter me? Or are you just honest?" "Both," I said without thinking. And the second it left my mouth, I felt the room shrink. Mason's grin softened into something quieter, more serious. He dropped the shirt over his head, pulling it down slowly. The fabric hugged his chest tighter than it did mine. He stepped closer, and I could feel his warmth even before our shoulders brushed. "You ever notice?" he said, tilting his head like he wasn't sure if he wanted to finish the thought, "how different a person feels in someone else's clothes?" I blinked. "Different how?" "Closer," he whispered. "Closer to them, somehow." My stomach twisted. I knew exactly what he meant. My heartbeat sped up. And then he did something that made my entire rational mind explode. He leaned in so that his shoulder pressed against mine, casual but deliberate, testing the boundaries I hadn't realized existed. I wanted to pull back. My brain screamed at me to stop, to remind myself that Mason was my best friend, that he wasn't supposed to be this close. But another part of me, the part that had been lying dormant for weeks, months maybe, wanted him to stay, wanted him to press closer, to see if the line we'd crossed yesterday wasn't just a fluke. And he did. He lingered there, shoulder brushing mine, his hand absent-mindedly adjusting the hem of my shirt around his waist. I could feel the fabric between us, the friction, the warmth. Then his gaze shifted to mine, steady, unflinching. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, voice low, almost shy. "I just wanted to try this. See if it felt right. And it does, being near you like this." I swallowed hard. "Feels right?" "Yeah," he said softly. "Better than right." The words sent a jolt straight through me. I wanted to argue, to say no, to push him away. But my limbs felt like they had forgotten how to move. I could only stare, breath-catching. And then, without warning, he shifted closer, his arm brushing against mine in a movement that was casual for him, but incendiary for me. I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't. My mouth felt dry, my chest tight. I was acutely aware of the sound of our breathing, the distant hum of traffic outside, and the faint scent of my own laundry detergent mixed with him. He noticed my hesitation and smiled softly, almost gently. "You don't have to say anything. Just feel it." I did. I let myself feel it. The tension, the warmth, the ridiculous electricity of a friend suddenly feeling impossibly close, testing boundaries I hadn't known existed. I couldn't move my hand, couldn't move my eyes. All I could do was let him. And then he leaned his head just a little against my shoulder, not in a rush, not in a showy way. Just resting there, testing again, waiting, watching. My chest felt like it would burst. This was Mason, my friend, and somehow this felt dangerously, intoxicatingly right. I realized then, fully and unavoidably, that the clothes weren't the point anymore. That had been just the excuse. The pretext. It was him. And something in me, something I'd spent years pretending didn't exist, wanted him closer, wanted to see where this could go. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I just let him stay there. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, terrifyingly alive. By the time evening rolled around, the air in my apartment felt heavier, charged with something neither of us had named yet. Mason had stayed longer than usual, longer than I expected. Not that I minded. Every time he moved, every subtle brush of his fingers against mine as he reached for something sent a jolt through my chest I couldn't ignore. We were sprawled on the couch, half watching a movie neither of us was paying attention to. Mason had swapped into another one of my shirts, a soft, faded black tee that smelled faintly of my cologne from weeks ago, and the way it hung over him was somehow both casual and intimate. He had the sleeves rolled slightly, just enough to reveal the sculpted line of his arms, and the collar hung low, teasing at the curve of his chest. I tried to focus on the movie. I really did. But my gaze kept returning to him, to the way his fingers fidgeted with the hem of the shirt, the way his lips curved in that small, distracted smile. The couch between us felt simultaneously vast and impossibly tight, and every accidental brush of his knee against mine made my pulse spike. "You're quiet," he said suddenly, voice low like he was testing me. "Just watching." I lied. My throat was dry. I swallowed hard, trying to sound normal, but it came out shaky. "You're lying." He leaned a fraction closer, just enough for me to feel the heat from his shoulder. "Something's on your mind. You've been staring at me all evening." I froze. My brain scrambled for words, but the truth was simpler than anything I could manufacture. I couldn't stop thinking about him. About the way he looked in my clothes, about the way his presence filled my apartment, about the way he made it impossible to think rationally. I started, then cut myself off. "Say it," he whispered, leaning closer. My chest thumped so loudly I thought he might hear it. I faltered, my heart hammered in my ears. "I like this, being here. With you." Mason's smile softened, then disappeared, replaced by something quieter, more serious. "Just being here?" His voice was teasing, yes, but it carried an edge of vulnerability I hadn't heard before. "Or this too?" He gestured vaguely toward the space between us. My pulse went nuclear. "This," I whispered, barely audible. "All of this." He shifted, so close now I could feel the warmth radiating from him, feel the subtle brush of his shirt against mine. And then, impossibly, he pressed a hand lightly against mine, letting it rest there without squeezing, without a word. Just testing the waters, waiting, watching. My stomach twisted in ways I hadn't anticipated. I wanted to pull away, and at the same time I wanted to lean into him, wanted to feel every inch of proximity, every subtle brush, every heartbeat we shared in silence. I realized then that Mason wasn't just testing my boundaries. He was testing mine and his own. He tilted his head, letting his forehead hover just above mine. The air between us was electric. He didn't move any closer, and yet it felt like he had. I could feel the faint tremor of his breathing against my cheek, the warmth of his lips just barely brushing my skin. "I shouldn't," he murmured. "Shouldn't what?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Do this." He gestured again at the intimacy between us, at the quiet tension building faster than either of us had expected. "You're my best friend. I don't want to ruin that." "You won't," I said quickly, though even as I said it, the words felt fragile. Not if we're careful. We can figure this out," slowly. Mason's lips curved into a small, relieved smile, and then he did something I hadn't expected. He leaned in fully, just slightly, and brushed his lips against my cheek. Just a soft, almost accidental touch, but it made my knees go weak. The warmth of his body pressed against mine, the subtle scent of him mingling with the faint laundry detergent on my shirt, the tension lingering like a live wire, everything about it made my chest ache. I didn't move. I couldn't. My hand rested against his pressed against mine, and suddenly the couch felt like the only place in the world. He pulled back slightly, just enough to meet my eyes. "That okay?" he whispered. "Yes." I breathed, heart racing. More than okay. He laughed softly, a little nervously, and leaned back, keeping his hand in mine. God, I've wanted to do that for so long, he admitted. I wanted to ask how long, but I didn't. I didn't need to. Somehow, just the admission, the acknowledgement, the shared space, and the gentle brush of his hand was enough. And then, without warning, Mason shifted, pressing closer. This time there was no hesitation. His chest brushed mine, his thigh pressed against mine under the soft fabric of my jeans. I could feel his warmth, the subtle tension in his body, and the slight brush of his lips at my jaw as he whispered, "You're mine for the night, right?" I swallowed hard, my brain scrambling, but my body reacted on its own. "Yeah," I whispered. "Yours." And in that moment, everything changed. The clothes were no longer the pretext. They were irrelevant. It was Mason. Just him. Close, warm, teasing, and impossibly intimate. He pressed his forehead against mine again, softer this time, lingering just long enough for my mind to reel and my heart to catch fire. And then his lips hovered at my temple, just a whisper away. "May I?" he asked. I didn't need him to clarify. I just nodded. And that night, Mason didn't stop at shirts and hoodies. He pushed boundaries, inch by inch, carefully, teasingly, exploring what it meant to be more than friends, but in the safest, most intoxicating way possible. Every touch, every brush, every whispered word between us escalated the tension until it was unbearable. Every time I thought I could predict him, he surprised me. Every time I tried to hold back, I failed. By the end of the night, the apartment felt smaller, the space between us had disappeared completely. And I knew, without a doubt, that things would never be the same. Not for either of us. The next morning, the apartment smelled faintly of coffee and last night's lingering warmth. I woke first, tangled in the sheets, heart still hammering from the events that neither of us had fully named, but both had felt. Mason was still asleep on the couch, or more accurately, sprawled half over the edge of the cushions, one arm draped over the back, hoodie still on, but my hoodie this time. It was stretched across his frame like it had been made for him, soft and worn and smelling faintly of him. I lay there for a moment, just watching him breathe, the sunlight catching his hair in golden streaks, tracing his jawline, highlighting the curve of his neck. Every inch of him looked casual and effortless, but my chest twisted in ways I couldn't explain. He wasn't just my best friend anymore. He was him. My mind kept circling that word, turning it over and over. Him. I had to move carefully. Any sudden motion might wake him, ruin the fragile intimacy of the moment, shatter the silence between us that had been so carefully balanced the night before. But my curiosity got the better of me, and I reached out. Just a hand, hovering over his arm. The warmth radiating from him was enough to make my fingers tingle. Mason stirred at my touch, blinking awake, hair falling into his eyes. When he looked up, his gaze caught mine, half sleep, half awareness, and something unspoken passed between us. He didn't pull away. Not at all. Instead, his lips curved into a sleepy smile, small but charged with something I couldn't name yet. "Morning," he whispered, voice low, husky from sleep. "Morning," I said, my own voice cracking, despite my efforts to keep it steady. We sat there like that for a long moment, neither of us moving. The air was thick with last night's residue. The heat, the closeness, the thrill of boundaries crossed but carefully preserved. And yet, the tension wasn't gone. It had evolved. From teasing, from playful, it had transformed into something raw, something more urgent, more intimate. You stayed," I murmured, almost more to myself than to him. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing playfully, and brushed a hand along my thigh. Not in a flirtatious or casual way, but in a deliberate, testing way. My stomach lurched. "I didn't want to leave," he admitted. His voice was quiet, intimate, filled with a vulnerability I'd never seen in him before. "Not after last night." My throat went dry. Neither did I confessed. He shifted closer, shoulders brushing mine. The hoodie fell open slightly as he leaned, revealing more of his chest beneath. I was acutely aware of every line, every contour, every inch of skin pressed against my own. "You make it hard," he said, almost a whisper, lips brushing my ear. "You make it impossible to pretend none of this matters." I swallowed hard, heat rising in my chest. Mason. I tried to warn him off, tried to create space, but my body betrayed me. I couldn't move. My chest, my arms, my legs, all frozen by anticipation and desire. He shifted again, this time pressing his hip lightly against mine, just enough for me to feel the strength in him, the weight, the proximity, the deliberate closeness. My pulse thundered in my ears. And then, impossibly, he draped an arm over my shoulder, fingers brushing my collarbone, thumb grazing lightly against the soft fabric of my shirt. "You're mine," he whispered, not teasing, not joking, serious, intimate, breathless. I froze. The words, soft and deliberate, wrapped around my chest and squeezed. "Yours." I breathed back, without hesitation, without thinking. He leaned into me further, this time resting his forehead lightly against mine, the heat of his breath warming my cheek. I could feel the rapid rise and fall of his chest, the subtle tension in his body pressing against mine. It was intoxicating, dangerous, maybe, but I didn't care. "Last night, the clothes," he murmured. "That was just the start, wasn't it?" I nodded slowly, words failing me. It was more than clothes. It had never been about that. It had been about us, about the tension, the electricity, the intimacy that had been simmering for months, maybe years, and had finally found a way to surface. Mason's lips hovered just inches from mine. Not a kiss yet, not that close. Just testing the waters, teasing the boundary, seeing if I would meet him halfway. And I did. I tilted my head, letting him close the distance, letting him see that I wanted this, that I had wanted this for longer than I could admit, that every brush of his shoulder, every glance, every subtle teasing touch had been playing with a fire I couldn't put out. He closed the distance, barely, just enough for his lips to brush mine softly. Light, tentative, testing. I felt the electricity arc through me, the warmth of his body pressing against mine, and my hands rose almost instinctively to his chest, feeling the strong line of muscle beneath my fingers, feeling the tension, the want. We broke apart for a second, just enough to catch our breaths, just enough to stare at each other. His hair fell over his eyes, his lips glistened faintly, and his chest rose and fell in sync with mine. "I shouldn't," he whispered again, but the words were lost in the electricity. "Don't," I said. "Don't think. Just be here." He smiled softly, eyes dark and intense, and then, slowly, deliberately, he pressed closer again. This time, it wasn't tentative. His hands found mine, lacing fingers with mine, thumbs brushing, gentle but deliberate, like he was claiming something he'd been holding back for years. And I didn't stop him. Not then. Not ever after. That afternoon stretched into evening, filled with the soft, tantalizing exploration of proximity, breath, and touch. Every inch of the couch felt too small. Every movement, a careful negotiation between friendship and desire. Every glance, every whispered word, every subtle brush of skin against skin was a declaration, a confession, a question we didn't need to put into words. Mason didn't stop at clothes anymore. He lingered in every space where intimacy could exist without words. Hands brushing, shoulders pressing, fingers teasing, lips grazing, hearts racing. Every movement, every touch, every shared breath built a tension so heavy it was almost unbearable, yet completely intoxicating. By the time night fell and the city outside dimmed into quiet, the apartment felt like its own universe. Just Mason and me. And nothing else existed but the shared heat, the warmth, the desire that had been building for months and had finally erupted, quietly, deliberately, intimately. And I realized, with a sudden, sharp clarity, that this was only the beginning. The next day, I woke to the faint golden light spilling through the blinds, stretching across the room and catching Mason's silhouette on the couch. He was still curled in my hoodie, legs tucked up slightly, one arm draped lazily over the backrest. He looked peaceful, almost unaware of the tension that had roared through the apartment the night before. And yet, I knew he was aware. That tiny, almost imperceptible shift in the way he moved, the way he breathed, the subtle curve of his smile even in sleep, it was all a continuation of yesterday. I lay there for a long moment, just watching him, feeling a strange mix of calm and electricity. Part of me wanted to wake him, to press my lips to his temple, to feel him close again. But another part of me wanted to let him linger there, savor the quiet, savor the moment, because these were the moments that made the uncertainty bearable. The tension had shifted overnight, evolved from playful teasing into a careful, deliberate intimacy neither of us could ignore. Eventually, Mason stirred, stretching and yawning, the movement casual, but the way he rubbed the sleep from his eyes and tugged slightly at the hem of my hoodie, it was deliberate, intimate, a subtle claim. I swallowed hard, heart hammering, feeling a heat I couldn't control. "Morning," I said, voice low, almost shy. "Morning," he replied, eyes still half closed, his lips quirking into that small, mischievous smile that had haunted my dreams for months. He shifted closer to me on the couch, just enough for our thighs to touch lightly, sending a jolt of awareness straight through me. I wanted to speak, to break the quiet, but every word felt fragile and inadequate. Instead, I let the silence stretch, letting the space between us fill with 1,000 unspoken possibilities. Mason's hand moved almost absent-mindedly, brushing against mine as he adjusted the hoodie around his shoulders. My fingers twitched, yearning to close the gap, to hold him, to feel more. "You stayed," I finally murmured, barely audible. "Yeah," he said softly. "Couldn't leave after last night." The memory of yesterday, the brush of his lips against my temple, the way he pressed close, the deliberate touches, the electricity coursing between us, made me flush. "Neither could I admitted. He turned his head, meeting my gaze fully, and for a long moment, the air seemed to thicken, charged with something dangerous and irresistible. His eyes were serious, dark, and full of a quiet intensity that made me tremble from the inside out. "I've been thinking about this, about us," he whispered, voice low, intimate. "About how it felt, about last night." I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. "I've been thinking about it too," I admitted. "More than I should." A small, almost mischievous smile appeared, but it didn't diminish the intensity in his eyes. "Good," he said softly, leaning closer, his shoulder brushing mine deliberately. "Because I'm not done, not by a long shot." And then he did something that made my heart explode. He draped an arm over my shoulder, pressing his chest lightly against mine. Not forcefully, not hurriedly, but close, intimate, claiming a space that had been unspoken but long desired. I could feel the heat radiating off him, the subtle tension in his body, the faint brush of his lips at my ear as he whispered, "You don't know how long I've wanted this." I shivered. "Then show me," I whispered back. He smiled, a slow, deliberate grin that sent electricity down my spine. "I will," he said, and without hesitation he pressed closer, tilting his head, letting his lips graze mine softly. Not a kiss, not yet, but a teasing, exploratory touch, testing the boundaries. My hands rose almost instinctively to his chest, feeling the warmth, the muscle, the subtle tension. We lingered like that for what felt like hours, neither of us moving too fast, neither of us breaking the fragile balance. Every brush of fingers, every tilt of the head, every whispered word was an escalation of intimacy. The apartment was small, suffused with the warmth of late morning sun, and it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of us. Mason's hand slid gently along my side, then rested lightly on my thigh, fingers brushing with a deliberate teasing that made me gasp softly. "Do you feel this?" he whispered, lips barely brushing my ear. "Yes," I breathed. Every second, he leaned in closer, pressing his forehead to mine, eyes locked. "Then let's not stop," he whispered. "Not yet. Not until we figure this out fully." And for the first time, I realized we weren't just experimenting with clothes anymore. That had been the excuse, the gateway. This closeness, this intimacy, the deliberate, teasing touches, was just the beginning. Mason wasn't stopping. He had crossed the line with a careful, deliberate intent, and I wasn't about to pull back. I wanted him, more than I'd ever wanted anything before. His lips brushed against mine again, soft, tentative, teasing, but this time longer, lingering, claiming a promise of more. I responded instinctively, closing the gap, letting my fingers trace the line of his jaw, the curve of his neck. Every inch of proximity sent sparks through me, igniting a fire that had been smoldering quietly for months. When we finally broke apart, breathless and flushed, he smiled softly. "See?" he whispered. "Clothes were just the start." I nodded, heart pounding. "I know." And at that moment, I understood fully. Mason wasn't just my friend. He wasn't just someone trying on my shirts for fun. He was the start of something uncontrollable, irresistible, and entirely ours. Something neither of us would ever walk away from. By evening, the apartment felt different. It wasn't just warm from the fading sunlight or the small heater humming in the corner. It was charged, alive, like it was aware of us, of everything that had shifted between Mason and me over the past 24 hours. The tension that had started as playful teasing with my clothes had evolved into something heavier, deeper, more urgent, something undeniable. Mason was sitting on the couch across from me, legs tucked under him, hoodie still mine, stretched in the soft, familiar way I'd started to recognize as his. We had spent the afternoon in a quiet limbo, talking in soft voices, brushing against each other occasionally, laughing lightly, hearts hammering beneath the surface. Neither of us had moved too fast. Neither of us had crossed the final line, yet the air between us was electric. I was acutely aware of the way his eyes lingered on mine, the way he let his hand brush against mine when he reached for the mug of tea we'd made together, the subtle dip of his shoulder when he leaned back. Every small motion carried weight. Every tiny gesture was charged with possibility. "I can't stop thinking about last night," I admitted finally, voice low. Mason tilted his head, that small, teasing half smile on his lips, but his eyes were serious. "Neither can I," he said. "I keep replaying it in my head. Your hand on me, the way you let me lean against you. I've wanted that for so long." His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Longer than I realized." Something in me snapped. All the months of pretending, of burying feelings beneath jokes and casual touches, couldn't hold anymore. My chest tightened. My fingers itched to reach for him, to close the distance, to erase every inch between us. I moved first. Slowly, deliberately, I leaned forward, brushing my hand against his thigh. His breath hitched slightly, and a small, almost imperceptible shiver ran through him. His eyes widened in that fraction of a second, just enough to make my heart race faster. "You don't have to say anything," I whispered. "Just let me." He didn't move. He didn't resist. He just let me, eyes locked on mine like he was silently giving me permission. And that permission ignited something inside me that I hadn't realized was waiting. I reached for his face, cupping his jaw gently, thumb brushing against the soft skin beneath his ear. Mason leaned into my touch immediately, closing his eyes briefly, his lips parting slightly in anticipation. My chest hammered in my ribs as I lowered my head, brushing my lips against his in a tentative, feather-like kiss. It was electric. Shocking in its softness, in its hesitation, in the fact that he didn't pull away. I felt his hands rise, resting on my shoulders at first, then sliding down my arms as if testing my boundaries, pressing closer. My hoodie slipped slightly, revealing the curve of his collarbone, the warmth of his skin against mine, and my hands followed, memorizing the line of him beneath the soft fabric. The kiss deepened slowly, naturally. No rush, no frantic urgency, just two people discovering what had been simmering between them for months. Mason's lips were soft, coaxing, familiar, and the gentle press of his body against mine made every nerve in my body hum with a fire I couldn't contain. We broke apart briefly, foreheads pressed together, breath mingling, hearts hammering. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, the intensity, the longing, the unspoken promise of more. "I've wanted this," he whispered, voice trembling slightly. "Every time we've been together, every time you've brushed against me, every joke, every look, I've wanted this." "Me too," I admitted, my fingers tightening slightly on the fabric of his hoodie. "I've been waiting, but I didn't know if you'd ever let it happen," he finished for me, a small, vulnerable smile forming. "I didn't either." We kissed again, this time with more urgency, more certainty, letting the weeks of tension and longing spill over. My hands traced the line of his back under the hoodie, feeling the firm muscle, the warmth, the reality of him. Mason pressed closer, hips nudging mine, hands sliding under my shirt briefly, tentative but deliberate, testing, claiming. It was messy, imperfect, tender, and electric. Every kiss, every brush of fingertips, every whispered word wove us tighter together. Clothes became irrelevant. They were just the pretext, the gateway. But the intimacy we shared now was real, raw, and entirely ours. Hours passed like minutes. The apartment fell silent except for our breathing, our whispers, the occasional laugh as we pressed closer, explored the spaces between us, reveled in the vulnerability we'd finally allowed ourselves to share. When we finally paused, lying next to each other, bodies pressed together, hearts slowing, Mason rested his head on my chest. I could feel the rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of him, the faint scent of my hoodie clinging to him. "You're mine now," he whispered softly, almost a prayer. "And you're mine," I answered, pressing a kiss to the top of his head, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat under my palm. For the first time, I felt completely, undeniably alive. Mason wasn't just my friend anymore. He wasn't just the guy trying on my clothes. He was everything I'd been holding back, everything I'd been waiting for. And in that quiet, sunlit apartment, with him in my arms and my clothes on his body, nothing else mattered. We didn't need words. We didn't need explanations. We just had each other, and that was enough. It had started with a joke, a casual tease, a simple experiment, but it ended with us, fully, completely, irrevocably together, and neither of us would ever look at just clothes the same way again.